Writing. Our guest today is the Alderman of the 42nd Ward. His career in public service began shortly after graduating from New York's Hobart College in 1994. In 1995, our guest today went to work for House Speaker Michael J. Madigan as a policy analyst and as communications director. Following his nearly 7 years in state government, he was tapped by AT&T to serve as Midwest Vice President for Public Affairs, AT&T's youngest regional vice president. Our guest today has emerged as a member of a new generation of Chicago's leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the City Club of Chicago, 42nd Ward Alderman, Brendan Reilly. Alderman?
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, and good afternoon. Before I start, I'd like to thank Jay for having me here today and for all of you showing up to hear my speech. Would also like to acknowledge the love of my life and my lovely bride, Kristen Reilly, if you'd please stand up. Last Monday, about this time, I was very proud to have polished off, a week in advance, my City Club speech. It was entitled, "The City Council and Mayor Daley, What to Expect in 2011. And as you can imagine, by Tuesday morning, that speech was immediately obsolete. So into the circular file it went. Obviously, since last Tuesday, there's been a tremendous amount of speculation related to the upcoming mayoral race. I think I speak for most of my colleagues. You tell me if I'm wrong, Joe, but we all generally expected Mayor Daley to seek another term. And so when it was announced by Chairman Burke during the Finance Committee that the mayor would not be seeking re-election, those of us who weren't laughing because we thought it was a joke were gasping audibly, because it's very hard to imagine a city of Chicago without a Mayor Daley. And I can tell you that although the mayor and I have had our policy disagreements over the last 3.5 years of my first term, I think the city of Chicago has truly prospered under his leadership. Since the mayor's announcement, we've heard a lot about what skills his successor will need to bring to the job in order to be an effective city leader moving forward in 2011. Many of my colleagues have been telling the media they believe we need to have a coalition builder, and I think that's absolutely correct. The next mayor is going to need council allies in order to support his or her political agenda and to balance our city's budgets, and also to avoid devolving into infighting and civil warfare on the city council. We've heard very little about what other professional skills that will be needed by the next mayor of the city of Chicago. And most importantly, we've heard very little about those management skills, the ability to direct resources. Essentially, we need a leader who can serve as a chief executive, managing people and resources effectively. That CEO will also need a top-notch executive team and cabinet that brings fresh ideas and a private sector approach to problem solving in our great city. We need people to refocus city priorities and shrink the size of government to one that we can afford. This means putting the right people in the right seats on the bus, matching management skills properly with city departments. We're not looking for a super legislator or a celebrity mayor who speaks in platitudes and sound bites. Instead, we need a more wonkish, numbers-oriented mayor who understands basic management of large organizations, how to manage large budgets, and how to get the very most out of our city employees. Regardless of the campaign rhetoric and promises that will be made over the next 6 months by likely 30 candidates for mayor, our next mayor needs to rebuild our city government from scratch to control our city budget. Until we are able to right-size our city budget and erase a massive budget deficit, any promises made by our next mayor are really nothing more than that, empty rhetoric and dreams that will never be fulfilled. In order to address our police shortage and add hundreds of more cops sorely needed to our roles, we're going to need money. Tackling our city's poverty issues, neighborhood crime, and homelessness will require money. Maintaining infrastructure, maintaining our downtown central business district, That will cost money. Providing more efficient public transit. That will cost more money. And in order for us to meet any of our ongoing obligations, we need to get this budget under control. So I'd encourage you all now to take a second cup of coffee. We're about to talk about numbers and about the city budget. And I'd like to acknowledge up front, this is somewhat dry material. But I happen to think it's awfully timely as we're preparing to select a new mayor and as we look at facing a $655 million budget deficit for 2011. Why are we in this massive budget deficit? Truth be told, our city revenue streams are weak, weaker than they've been since the Great Depression, no weaker, rather, since the Great Depression. We rely very heavily on transfer taxes of real property and property taxes to fund our budgets. And since the economy collapsed 3 years ago, those revenue streams are a mere fraction of what they were in 2006 and 2007. I happen to agree with Mayor Daley that Chicago taxpayers cannot afford another tax increase. It's absolutely critical that we hold the line on taxes and put the city's budget on a strict diet and force local government to live within its means. It's worth mentioning that over the last 3 years, I've voted against 2 of the 3 mayoral budgets since I've been here, largely out of objections to property tax increases, increases in fees, failure to collapse organizations into more efficient working groups, and a general failure to reduce the size of city government. It's fair to say the city is facing a true budget crisis. We have not experienced these challenges since the Great Depression. While many may see this as bad news, terrible news, I see it as an opportunity to reinvent Chicago government from the ground up. The first thing we need to do is implement a new budgeting approach here in the city. When I was an appropriation analyst in Springfield, helping analyze the state budget, we used something called zero-based budgeting. Now, this was many years ago when the state was passing and balancing budgets, but perhaps they should revisit this practice because it worked well then. This is not something that we do here in the city of Chicago. When a department comes in for a budget request during these times, during budget hearings, they bring in last year's budget, and we tinker in the margins by a percentage point or 2 in trying to address our budget deficits. We need to zero-base our budget. It's an old approach. We can use it to help reinvent city government and find efficiencies one department at a time as we literally rebuild bureaucracy line item by line item. This is a very painful and arduous task. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of meetings, and it takes a lot of tough questions. But zero-based budgeting essentially requires each department to come in with $0 and justify every single position in that department from the ground up until we get a total number to consider approving. We aren't doing that now. By using zero-based budgeting, we can do a number of great things to help us get better clarity in our budget document. We need to more clearly define job titles and responsibilities to eliminate unnecessary overlap between employees and departments. We need to categorize employees by department. What positions are revenue-generating positions? Positions that capture matching funds? Positions that provide frontline services? Positions dedicated purely to management and administration? We need to consolidate responsibility and simplify work charts. There are many employees with overlapping jurisdictions and similar duties spread across multiple departments. That needs to change. I'll give you an example. Inspectors. The city employs many, many inspectors for a variety of reasons, and they report to different departments. Zoning, buildings, Department of Transportation, Environment, DBA. When we dispatch inspectors to a business to investigate code complaints, the city has to send multiple inspectors, oftentimes one from the health department, one from the building department, one from business affairs, and one from the health and one from another department, each to write a separate ticket for a violation. We need to retrain certain inspectors and empower them to issue a range of citations across the code that will allow us to redeploy inspectors and maximize the use of those resources. You shouldn't need 3 separate inspectors to write 3 separate tickets. You should be able to send one. We need to streamline management and delayer bureaucracy to eliminate unnecessary middle management and have fewer people managing more direct reports. The administration is correct when they remind us that roughly 70% of the city's budget is dedicated to funding public safety services, police, fire, OEMC, the bulk of which are covered by collective bargaining agreements. That said, non-public safety management salaries still account for roughly $180 million in our annual budget. It was recently reported that the current manager to direct report ratio at the city is 1 manager for every 8 employees. In some departments, we have seen 1 manager overseeing just 1 or 2 direct reports. That has to change. Now is the time to eliminate many assistant and deputy commissioner job titles. We need to group larger divisions of direct reports under fewer managers. Rather than maintaining the 1-to-8 ratio, we need to consider doubling that ratio, 1 manager to every 15 employees. This simple move could achieve roughly $75 million in annual savings to our city budget, a substantial number. We also need to narrow the city's focus on services, to keenly focus on our core competencies and the mission of our charter, to provide for public safety, to maintain our infrastructure, to promote economic development, and to shepherd community development through urban planning and outreach. For those services that fall outside of these 4 critical areas, we need to consider shifting those services to other agencies, either at the county or the state, or do without them altogether until a time when we can afford them. We also need to continue to consolidate city departments by collapsing similar departments together into mega agencies to eliminate silos in government and cut managerial costs. Last month, Mayor Reilly announced plans to consolidate the Department of Zoning with the Department of Community Development into 1 large planning department. I think that's a fantastic idea. The new department would include zoning, community development, as well as housing and workforce development. This mega agency will require an excellent manager at the helm, someone who can direct people and resources efficiently and quickly, and who is a professional focused on results and accountability. As we continue to consolidate many smaller departments into larger ones, it is critical that professional managers run these departments, managers who can implement new efficient systems. If they are not subject matter experts, they can appoint experts as their middle managers to help them run these agencies. We also need to take a look at getting out of areas where we do not hold a core competency. And it pains me to say this, but this is a difficult budget year, and we need to talk about tough solutions. We have to take a good, hard look at the City Department of Public Health. The Department of Public Health is professionally run. We have excellent people who work there. However, we need to take a good, hard look at whether or not the city can afford to be in this line of work. I don't have to tell you all that we have a phenomenal public health system here in Cook County, administered by County Public Health. I know this because for 15 years my father was the chairman of medicine at Cook County Hospital. We need to consider transferring all healthcare programs and services to Cook County Hospital, which has the core competency and infrastructure to provide healthcare at a lower cost and with greater efficiency. In some cases, city health facilities are located within a block or 2 of a county facility, providing nearly identical services. By transferring our health services to Cook County, we can reduce significant overhead that comes with facility management, maintenance, security, and even pension liabilities. By transferring headcount to county that captures federal and state matching funds, Chicago does not lose out on partially funded healthcare positions. They are simply managed by the public health experts at Cook County, who have been doing this better than we have for many years. This move would help Cook County maximize the potential of their community-based satellite clinics in our neighborhoods, adding more staff to serve clients in existing facilities and reaping the benefits of aggregating purchasing power for basic medical supplies and drugs. Health inspections could then be collapsed under the Department of Business Affairs as a division of that department, another department that administers many city inspections, including the inspections of food preparation facilities and restaurants. There are many other opportunities to further consolidate departments, but I'll have to save those upcoming budget budget proceedings next week. Another thing we need to build into each of our departments are departmental auditors, reporting to the Inspector General in order to establish greater fiscal accountability and transparency in our city departments. These auditors would be embedded in our new mega agencies to ensure they have a keen understanding of the department's inner workings and day-to-day functions, and being charged with performing fiscal and performance audits on an annual basis. This will allow us to more carefully monitor how departments are spending money and directing resources, and help us identify new models for efficiency and savings. We also need to establish formal grant managers in the Office of Budget Management, focused squarely on preserving existing funding streams and identifying all public, federal and state matching grant opportunities and aggressively pursuing larger grants from the national private trusts. There are hundreds of grants available to local government to help offset the cost associated with certain services and programs. The City of Chicago needs to position itself to aggressively compete for every one of those grant dollars. We need to reinvent the Department of General Services. This is the department that helps the city manage its procurement of goods and commodities and manage its cost for facilities. By streamlining the department's bureaucratic layers and bringing in creative professionals with expertise in asset management from the private sector, we can make this department run far more efficiently. The Department of Fleet Management should be folded into General Services. Fleet Management is in charge of maintaining all of our vehicles and equipment and cars that the city needs to serve constituents on a daily basis. They should be folded into General Services. These are assets that can be maximized through the aggregation of market power and should fall under this department. The department should be tasked with identifying opportunities to outsource certain management services in the areas of property management, fleet management, and the purchase of most commodities. If outsourcing agreements already exist, they should all be rebid to ensure taxpayers are receiving the best value for their money today. General Services needs to prioritize and aggressively pursue aggregation opportunities by combining our purchasing power with sister agencies like CTA, the public schools, CHA, and the Chicago Park District to become a major wholesale purchaser of commonly used commodities like computer equipment, paper, furniture, vehicles, gas, even pens and pencils. This department can help the next mayor solidify his or her legacy as America's greenest mayor while using sustainable practices to manage use of resources. I'm going to actually talk about a couple of programs near and dear to Commissioner Malik McKenna's heart because we've been working very closely on them. There's a very important program we've been piloting in downtown Chicago called Demand Response. Demand Response is essentially retrofitting buildings, HVAC systems, to allow large buildings and facilities to sell their unused electricity during peak hours of demand on the regional energy market and getting a return for that sale, essentially turning large buildings and facilities into energy arbitrageurs. This technology works. For the past 3 years, I've been partnering with the Citizens Utility Board, Commissioner McKenna at the Department of Environment, in Midwest Generation to manage a demand response pilot program in our downtown residential high-rise buildings. We started with just 4 buildings in our first year, and now currently have 20 large residential buildings participating in this program. Draper and Kramer and Sudler have been excellent partners in helping us sign up new buildings for this program. The building systems have been retrofitted to use wireless controls that remotely turn off HVAC systems under certain conditions, typically during the hottest days of the year during peak demand hours, so that unused load could be resold for a profit on the energy market. This demand response pilot program has generated real revenue for those buildings participating. The City of Chicago has millions of square feet in facility space to heat or cool, and would also be an excellent candidate for demand response. At Governor Quinn's request, I have also been very involved in the Illinois Korea Smart Grid Initiative, another project I'm working on with Commissioner McKenna, the Citizens Utility Board, the Illinois Science and Technology Coalition, and the Building Owners and Managers Association of Chicago. We are essentially hoping to make the City of Chicago the national test bed for all new emerging smart grid technology. This Illinois-Korea partnership presents additional opportunities for the City of Chicago in the areas of demand response, smart buildings, electric vehicle infrastructure deployment, the charging stations needed to use electric vehicles, workforce training, and smart grid energy market development. I'm chairing the committee charged with overseeing smart buildings and electric vehicle infrastructure. And as we work with BOMA to upgrade HVAC systems with Korean smart grid technology in our large commercial buildings downtown, we must also prioritize targeting large city facilities and buildings with the same upgrades in the near future. In our efforts to build out electric vehicle charging stations and the infrastructure needed to support no-emission electric vehicles that's being developed just up the road in Detroit and in Michigan, we need to make sure fleet management plays a role in that effort as well. Fleet vehicle conversion via strategic partnerships with car-sharing companies like iGo and Zipcar can pay tremendous dividends. Our fleet of city cars needs to shrink, and we should pursue mutually beneficial agreements with car-sharing companies that allow employees to reserve and use cars for work functions, but allows unused vehicles to be rented by the general public. Zipcar and iGo would manage and maintain the vehicles. In exchange for prime parking stall locations in and around the city and parking lots, facilities in the central business district, we would be able to take advantage of that fleet. As the Illinois-Korea partnership expands the network of electric vehicle charging stations downtown, we can also establish new benchmarks for city fleet conversion from gas power to electric. This is an excellent way to reduce liabilities associated with maintaining a large fleet of vehicles while also providing real financial and environmental benefits to the city of Chicago. Along the green line of balancing this budget, we should also work toward a goal of a paperless city bureaucracy by investing in further automation of city services. Although the city website has improved in recent years, as we work to consolidate and streamline our city departments, we must also completely rebuild our website and e-services. We must make it easier to pay for city services online, posting downloads of all city forms and applications on the internet, and allowing for the online renewal of certain permits and licenses. This move saves residents and businesses trips to City Hall, frustrating and long waits in line, or the need to hire expediters, while also sparing costly and scarce resources and staff time to process those requests. Other cities are piloting paperless systems to control costs and protect the environment. We should learn from them and engage private vendors that are emerging in this space. We also need to conduct a forensic audit of all current city contracts, large and small, to evaluate the necessity of the expense and the appropriateness of the cost for these services, to ensure every contract is providing a real value to Chicago taxpayers. Every contract must be re-examined, whether the contract is a multi-million-dollar public relations or marketing contract or pays for the outsourcing of legal work to outside counsel. We have to squeeze every dollar of value out of this budget. I'll give you an example. The law department outsources a tremendous amount of legal work to outside counsel to help address the volume of caseload the department handles every week. In many cases, we are paying these firms several $100s an hour, or large lump sum payments amounting to several $100s an hour, far in excess of what we pay in-house counsel or what we could be paying out-of-work attorneys at a much lower rate. When the economy turned sour here in Chicago months ago, hundreds of attorneys lost their jobs downtown. So did dozens of PR and marketing professionals. Rest assured, there is plenty of unutilized talent out there waiting for work. The city should seize on that opportunity to offer legal work to those lawyers who would certainly jump at the chance to make, say, $150 an hour rather than $300 an hour to do our city legal work, saving the city potentially millions of dollars in annual costs. We should approach every service contract the same way, negotiate the terms aggressively, and expect more services from vendors for lower cost to the taxpayer. We also need to take a look at better managing our revenue streams. I've talked a lot about managing costs, opportunities for consolidation. We also need to take a look at the money that's coming in the door. After we've administered this granular review of each department's staffing level and budget through the zero-based budgeting process, and we've identified additional savings and efficiencies, perhaps as much as $200 million a year, we must then turn our attention to those areas that are causing the city to hemorrhage revenue. There are three areas that really rank at the top of that list. One is obvious, the enforcement of city code and the issuance of violations. The second is reforming our blanket fee waiver program. And the third is the need for long overdue TIF reform. Code enforcement must be a much higher priority for the city of Chicago. Roughly half of the 2,000 plus phone calls that my constituent office processes every month, more than half are related to concerns about code enforcement, whether it involves the police department, the Department of Revenue, or another city agency. If you walk down any city block here in the Central Business District, in the 42nd Ward, you'll see dozens of violations going unticketed at any given hour of the day. To be clear, code enforcement should not be a priority because we're looking for money. It should be a priority because we expect people to obey and respect the laws and policies set by the city of Chicago. This is not about nickel and diming our way out of a massive budget deficit. As you know, many of our traffic and parking restrictions exist to expedite the movement of commerce and trade, or to alleviate major traffic congestion concerns, or to promote public safety. The enforcement of loading zones, tow zones, standing zones, cab stands, and bus idling may seem trivial and petty, but it's actually critical to supporting our transportation policy downtown. Parking and traffic restrictions are only effective when they're consistently and routinely enforced. For whatever reason, when vehicles are involved, common sense and courtesy are thrown out the window. Thus, we must rely on the pain caused by tickets to help us manage bad human behavior. By stepping up our enforcement, we will yield dual benefits. One, we will improve code compliance and change bad habits. Two, we will see a dramatic increase in short-term revenue to the city of Chicago. Millions of dollars in new annual revenue just from within the Central Business District alone. We must fully evaluate our current fee waiver program at the city to establish reasonable limits to the amount of fees that are waived for charitable and nonprofit institutions each year. Sources within the administration claim the waiver program is costing the city anywhere between $200 million and $300 million annually. A serious concern given that the cost of these fees are directly linked to the cost of the city's personnel providing the service. These fees are charged for right-of-way approvals, outdoor cafes, business licenses. Those are all directly linked to the cost of processing an application, administering an inspection, or simply shuffling paper from department to department. These are not arbitrary fee levels that are set to generate profit for the city of Chicago. For decades, the City Council has routinely granted blanket fee waivers for institutions big and small, without focusing on the actual total annual cost of waiving all of those fees. All 50 aldermen on the City Council waive fees. I do, and I'm happy to, and I've been happy to for 3 years. We all waive these fees in a vacuum, and no one's been tracking the grand total that this costs the city of Chicago. And as much as I would love to continue to grant blanket fee waivers ad infinitum till the end of time, the city of Chicago is broke. And much like a family managing a budget, we have to approach these costs the same way. When our family is gainfully employed and we're making our payments to our mortgage and bill collectors, we set aside money to support charitable purposes or a tithe to our church. When times are tough, if a family member loses a job, if we're having a hard time making a mortgage payment, unfortunately, some of those charitable acts need to sit on the back burner until we get our financial house in order. The same is true here with fee waivers. Fee waivers cost somebody something. These are not free or arbitrary services. So we need to, I think, establish a reasonable cap on fees waived per institution. In order to do that, we need to be fair about it. We need the city and the budget office to document the cost of every fee waiver granted to every institution in the city, big and small, so we can determine what the average is and try and figure out a good benchmark that we use as a cap on what fees will be waived on an annual basis. For those who exceed that cap, they're going to have to help us by paying those bills. In the event the city's economy and fiscal issues improve, we can talk about relaxing that program. But we need to take a look at every opportunity. The Budget Office needs to provide a full accounting of all fee waivers. Today, the fact that we can't readily access that information is worrisome. So think of that range, $200 to $300 million in the context of a $655 million budget gap. That could potentially be used to fill 45% of our operating budget deficit. Reforming the city's TIF program. For years, most people didn't really understand or care to understand tax increment finance districts, how they work, what they're intended to do, and how much revenue they divert from other units of local government, like the Chicago Public Schools, the Park District, Cook County, and even the city of Chicago. For a long time, members of the media considered TIF just a bit too complex to explain quickly in a news story, or just a bit too dry to be considered a sexy media report. Thanks to the relentless prodding and tireless investigative reports by Ben Jarafsky and Mick Dumke of the Chicago Reader, and thanks in part to the city's poor financial condition and massive budget deficit, TIF reform is now front and center in our public debate. Each year, our 159 TIF districts divert roughly $500 million from local governments, $250 million a year from CPS alone, and roughly $100 million away from the City of Chicago's general fund every single year. Currently, there is a $700 million to $1 billion surplus of unspent TIF funds in our various districts. Given the city's current financial crisis, we can and should declare these funds as a surplus and redistribute that diverted revenue back to local government. Declaring a surplus today would promise between $350 million and $500 million in new cash for the Chicago public schools alone, money that could be used to manage growing class sizes. The city of Chicago would receive an infusion of $140 to $200 million that would help plug our $655 million budget gap. Moving forward, we need to reform the TIF program to ensure that increment captured in TIF districts is used to address blight and support real, specific economic development initiatives and projects, not to serve as a money pot that provides gap financing to private developers. Over the past 3 years, I've worked with my colleagues Alderman Flores and Alderman Wagasback to fight for transparency and greater accountability in TIF, with regular reporting requirements, online posting of TIF reserve balances, and detailed information on pending TIF applications. Truth be told, we have too many TIF districts in the city of Chicago. I agree with my colleague Alderman Wagasback that we must conduct a detailed review of each of the 159 districts, audit them, and determine which should be closed. As the downtown alderman, I've reviewed dozens upon dozens of TIF requests over the past 3.5 years, many aimed at providing gap financing for downtown development projects, and I've rejected most of those requests. I believe I made a new city first when I became the first alderman to oppose the creation of a new TIF district in downtown's East Loop area, south of the river along Michigan Avenue. I rejected that proposal for a number of reasons, but especially because it would have benefited a handful of large building owners to fund upgrading of building systems and to subsidize tenant build-out at the expense of their neighbors. TIF should not be used to create winners and losers among building owners or to artificially prop up rental rates in the downtown office market. TIF requests should be carefully scrutinized by applying a strict but-for test and should provide some substantial public benefit. Having said all that, I count myself as a strong supporter of the TIF program. It is a very powerful economic tool that, when used correctly, can help us stimulate economic growth and redevelopment. TIF has helped support real neighborhood development and economic growth in blighted communities. It has helped us to build state-of-the-art public schools and has helped us to maintain critical infrastructure like roads and bridges. TIF is most effective when it is used proactively to assist with particular complex or challenging projects that directly address blight or promote the creation of permanent jobs in our neighborhoods. TIF is a tool that can help extend the prosperity and growth we are enjoying in downtown Chicago out into the neighborhood wards that are struggling with double-digit unemployment, in some areas as high as 30%. In recent years, TIF has been administered reactively. A developer wants some help financing an ambitious project. Because large TIF funds exist, they apply for funding in the hope the city will allow them to hit the jackpot. TIF allocations should not be made simply because the money exists and someone is asking for it. We must proactively identify opportunities for neighborhood stabilization and economic development, and then engage the development community to help make that happen on the back end. By holding our TIF program and expenditures to the highest standards, we ensure a program realizes its fullest potential by spurring new development and growth in those areas that need it most in our neighborhoods. We know that the 2011 elections promise us a new mayor and many new members on the city council. It represents the first time in nearly 50 years that we've had a battle for an open seat in the mayor's office. And I believe it offers us a new opportunity to implement these reforms and reshape the city of Chicago, resetting our priorities moving forward. Another issue that we need to implement, and I think we need to implement it next year, is how the city goes about invoicing folks for their various financial obligations. If you're a business owner in downtown Chicago, and I'm going to see a lot of nodding here in a moment, you receive invoices throughout the year, in some cases 6 or 7, and they come randomly on odd months, and usually it means you need to send someone downtown to stand in line to pay a bill. Why is the city not providing business owners with one centralized invoice in the first quarter of the year that clearly denotes all of that business owner's obligations to the city of Chicago? All right. I knew that would resonate. It's common sense. This serves several purposes. One, it gives business owners predictability. You have a sense in the first quarter of the fiscal year what you owe the city of Chicago. You have the opportunity to write one check and get that off your books and focus on running your business. It also provides some certainty to the city of Chicago. By sending out consolidated invoices in the first quarter, we'll know by the end of the first quarter how much money's come in the door. We don't have to play the guessing game for 9 months a year, wondering whether or not people are going to pay their financial obligations. We'll have a much clearer and realistic budget view based on those receipts. And for those receipts that don't come in the first quarter, we can spend the next three quarters chasing down those obligations and going after scofflaws. That's one basic common sense approach. And I could stand up here for 2 more hours and bore you all to death and give you many others. My colleagues in the City Council come up with a dozen great ideas a day. Every one of these should be given serious thought as we approach this upcoming budget negotiation. And that will start next week in earnest. I look forward to playing a role in helping reinvent city government and recalibrating its core mission to ensure this city remains a city that works and to best serve the people and taxpayers of Chicago. We do not have attractive options. There are no easy answers. We're going to have to make some very difficult and painful decisions and cuts over the next 12 months, but by doing so, we'll be handing our next mayor the tools he or she needs to lead this city into the future as the world-class city that it is today. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Judy.
Easy, easy, easy. We don't shout out questions. This is run like the city council. If you have a question, bring them up. By the way, wasn't that one heck of a re-election speech for 42nd Ward Alderman? Whatever. Easy, Ms. Costner. We go back a long way. Okay. Bob Manwith. You don't write. Why don't you write in invisible ink? What's your question?
What do you feel about perhaps reducing the size of the city council, not for money purposes, but for efficiency?
What do you want? Nothing like starting it off with a softball. Do you want to reduce the city council not for economic purposes, but for efficiency? Perhaps those wards along the lakefront.
Wow. It's a very good question. I can tell you, given the size of the ward that I'm currently in charge of, I'm representing over 100,000 people downtown, which is nearly double what a ward should be. I'd be okay with reducing the size of city government and the size of the city council. But that said, I don't know that it depends on how you define efficiency. I think efficiency of the city council is determined by the members on that city council and how they interact with their constituents. We all have no problem in communicating with one another, or at least talking to one another, maybe not communicating all the time. But it's something we should look at. We should also consider the idea of term limits. But I'm open to anything that's going to help us get this budget on the right path.
This is anonymous. Of course, it's written in red ink, so be quiet. All of the consolidation that you're talking about, who and how many people will be needed to look at all of these waivers, contracts, etc.?
I can't give you an answer to how many people will be needed to look at all of the contracts, et cetera, but it's work that we should have been doing for many years. Every contract should be carefully scrutinized. If you look at the private sector, I think I read this in Chicago Magazine, and I've read it elsewhere since. Typically, you have a ratio of 1 manager to 12 to 14 direct reports. That's what you typically see in the private sector where I come from. A ratio of 1 to 8 is unacceptable. That's not efficiency. That's called a fat middle management that's slowing the city down and gobbling up a lot of precious resource. So I think we shouldn't shy away from consolidation. I think we should embrace it and look at a way to rebuild each of these departments, brand new from scratch. I mean, that's the wonderful opportunity that comes with zero-based budgeting. We can start over and do it right, rather than just layer on new short-term fixes on an old broken department. So I think we need to give it a shot.
Okay. This is from a guy named Chris Hill. Where are you, Chris? Oh. How will the city 2011 budget be passed this year, or will it?
That's a really good question, and time will tell.
We got a lot of questions.
We haven't even heard the mayor's budget presentation yet, and I know there's going to be a lot of discussion after that fact. But agreed, I think the administration has a monumental task in finding the 26 votes necessary to pass a budget when we're looking at a $655 million hole.
Snappy question, snappy answers. Reuben Hedlund, what? Here now. This is a softball. What have you enjoyed most in being alderman, besides having some really incredible constituents?
Well, you just answered it there, Paul. Aside from the zoning process, it truly is a pleasure serving my constituents. The one thing that I enjoy the most is that at the end of the day, I can go home knowing I've accomplished something. My office exists to solve problems. As I mentioned during my remarks, we're processing over 2,000 unique constituent requests every month, and those are just the residential constituents. Layer on top of that close to another 2,000 permit and license applications from the thousands of small and large businesses downtown. We stay very, very busy. But during the course of our day, as we're triaging problems and prioritizing resources, we are able to solve problems the day they come in. And obviously, that's very, very satisfying. We have a number of long-term goals for the city of Chicago, and I certainly have a vision for where we'd like to take downtown Chicago. That takes more time to enjoy those victories. But day to day, we're solving problems for real people, day in, day out, and that's tremendously rewarding.
Okay. This is from Joe Hirsch. This should be another softball question. With the beautiful new Ogden Elementary School under construction, what is the chance for a new Ogden High School?
That's a great question, and for those of you who aren't aware, Ogden Elementary, we're building a brand new state-of-the-art LEED certified facility there that's actually going to clean up a lot of neighborhood issues we've had related to the busing of students. There will be a subterranean parking garage underneath the structure that will get all that traffic off the street and keep the kids safe from running in and out of traffic. It's going to be a gorgeous facility. Ogden is one of the very best elementary programs in the city of Chicago, and it sounds right that they should have a high school. Principal Starl actually went out and applied to create a new international high school that would be the area where Ogden elementary students matriculate to. I think we should formalize that high school program with bricks and mortar here in the 42nd Ward. I think it's worth mentioning, Paul, that I only have one public school in all of 42nd Ward, and it's Ogden. So we'd certainly love to have a high school there to partner with them.
Watch this, because I've been too jovial, right? Was Ogden built with TIF money?
Ogden was not built with TIF money.
Okay, just want to make sure. No softballs here. From Graham Grady, give me one good reason why you shouldn't run for mayor.
That's a good point, Joe. Mrs. Reilly. A number of my colleagues are very tempted to run for this job in 2011. I think Mayor Daley even predicted that there may be 49 aldermen running for mayor right now, and he's probably right. I think just as important as it is to have a strong mayor, a strong, capable mayor in that office in 2011, We also need to have some responsible aldermen that are going to be holding the line on taxes and bringing fiscal restraint to the city council, people who can assist the mayor in building those coalitions I mentioned that are so important. So we shouldn't just forget about the fact that the city council is what's supposed to be running the show in the city of Chicago. Ours is a strong council, weak mayor form of government, unless Mayor Daley's in office. And so I think what we're going to find out is what it's like to have not quite so strong a mayor in that office. And I think that means partnerships with the city council will be that much more important.
Two more questions, and now this is from Judy Turk from the Rooter Rivoli. Oh, no, that's your ward, right? What has happened to the money from the sale of the parking meters?
Unfortunately, a large chunk of that money has already been spent through the city budget. As popular as the parking meter lease was, and as well implemented as it was, a number of us voted for that deal because we were given some very strict assurances about how the proceeds would be used or not used. And we all understood that of the $1.2 billion in proceeds from that sale, that about $150 million would be used to plug a short-term budget deficit. Here we are 12 months later, and close to $1 billion has been used to plug short-term budget shortfalls. Absolutely irresponsible. That is why I was one of the aldermen who voted against the budget that spent that money. Say what you want about the parking meter lease, and I will admit it was poorly implemented. It's been a tremendous disappointment for all of us on the city council. And people can ask questions about whether or not the city taxpayers got the fair value for that asset. I'm currently leaning against that. I'm not sure that we are. But what we did with the proceeds after we got the money, I think, is even more reprehensible. You do not fill short-term structural gaps by using proceeds from asset sales. You hang on to that money. So that is one area where the mayor and I disagree very strongly. Alderman Wagasback and Alderman Moore and several of us have been talking about applying some new standards to any future discussion of public assets and whether or not they should be leased. Personally, I don't favor the future lease of any additional city assets. But if that's something that we need to examine, there needs to be a stringent framework that we evaluate those potential deals against. And that means we need to have a long and deliberative process. We can't be making these decisions in 72 hours or 96 hours. These require months of discussion and input from subject matter experts and financial experts. At the end of the day, it's our job to deliver the best value for the Chicago taxpayer. And I think it remains to be seen whether or not the parking meter lease fulfilled that obligation.
This is the last question and the last answer. You got those answers stretching out pretty good. This is from Ed Mazer, and we should leave it on an issue that really cuts to the chase, especially for your constituents. Now, Ed's not only talking about one aspect. If my wife was here, we'd also throw in the damn horses, but here we go. What do you propose to do regard to bicyclists who do not obey traffic rules and regulations? Should they be ticketed? Should their bicycling privileges be licensed? Should they have a license on their bicycle? If you live down here or drive Michigan Avenue, if you were a bus driver in here, you'd be really ticked off and be excited about this answer. What do you say about that, Mr. Alderman?
I actually get a lot of input about bicycles downtown. If you work in the loop, it's usually you're swearing at a messenger who's just blown a red light. And if you live along the lakefront, you're a pedestrian who's worrying about getting run over by one of those pedicabs. We're doing a few things related to bicycle policy, which I think are going to help improve the situation. When I took office, what I learned was that many of our downtown bike lanes are disjointed. There is no contiguous route from the west, the south, or the north sides into the central business district using bike lanes. You'll have a bike lane for 4 or 5 blocks, and then you're on your own for 3 or 4. Maybe you find another bike lane, grab onto that. We have not had that seamless route that the city desperately needs. I was inspired. I went to Berlin a couple of years ago and learned that 40% of commuters in the city of Berlin bike to and from work every day. And you can see why. They provided the infrastructure that you need to separate bicycles from traffic, vehicular, and pedestrian. And it came at a major investment. What we are currently doing now is we're building out over 2 miles of brand new bike lanes in downtown Chicago in the 42nd Ward so that we can link the neighborhoods to the central business district and give bicycle riders a safe place to ride. Now, in exchange for the new bike lanes, we're also going to be dramatically stepping up bicycle and driver education related to the rules of the road. Very few people in Chicago know it's illegal to ride a bicycle on a sidewalk. It is. We need to give folks a safe place to put that bicycle on the street, i.e. a bike lane. We've also been working very closely with the Chicago Police Department and Mayor Daley's bicycle ambassadors to do training missions where we stop, literally pull over bicyclists at dangerous intersections when they're in the process of committing a traffic violation or blowing through a red light or stop sign, to explain to them that's a ticketable offense, to hand them a pamphlet and explain to them the rules of the road. We need to really step up public education. I think there's a role for the Chicago media to assist us with that through public service announcements. I think the Chicago public schools should make this part of the curriculum, teaching children how to ride their bikes safely and not conflict with vehicles. I don't think we need to add new licenses and requirements for bicyclists. In many cases, rules of the road are common sense. But we do want to make sure bicycle riding is safe, and I do think that expansion of the Lakefront Trail is an exciting prospect. Building out our downtown bike lanes is another. Our upcoming Navy Pier flyover, which will segregate bicycle traffic from pedestrians at the most dangerous pinch point along the Lakefront Trail, will provide tremendous benefit. So it's really not a simple answer, Ed. It's going to take a whole slew of approaches to make that a safer venture for everyone downtown.
All right, good answer. That's it. How about a round of applause?
Thank you.